Good morning, everyone. Namaste. Good morning, all. Joining here together again on this Monday morning. This is our 7th week of coming together in this way, actually. So, good morning to everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Namaste. Good morning, all. So this is our 7th week, in fact, of being together in this way and seeing some of you who have come again and again for these last 7 weeks, the way in which we've been together. So beautiful. So this morning, good morning. This morning, I thought we could touch into something that we haven't yet in our exploration of Ayurveda. To be honest, each day, because we're on these lives and this isn't a sort of consecutive course that's happening together, I take a moment to contemplate what it is that we might speak to, the inspiration of the morning or something that's there. And hoping that if there are things that have been holes or things that have been left out for you when I'm speaking, because some of us have been together for these last 7 weeks, that you go back to some of the videos previously. You'll find them on the Facebook page or on YouTube as well. If I'm speaking as though we've already covered something, like presupposing, then I suppose that's what I'm inviting you to go back and to look. And otherwise, a lot of this is brought together in more of a full course together, and beyond that, I have to say, and much beyond that, in the 50-hour online Ayurveda course, which is coming up again in August. So some of you have really been asking me about that. Where can I continue to go deeper? I've been enjoying these inspirations in the mornings. And so I would really suggest that, because we cover over 4 months, over 16 weeks. We meet once a week for 3 hours. And you also, if you can't meet in person, then you receive the recordings. And then we dive in together in that way. So this morning, you might even think, oh, we should have covered this topic right at the beginning. But we didn't know that we would necessarily be insulated for as long as we have been. And so I would love for us this morning to discuss a little bit about how Ayurveda considers disease and where it arises from. So I suppose, firstly, to even consider the idea of or the concept of disease, according to Ayurveda, we also need to understand how Ayurveda looks upon health. So according to Ayurveda and according to the great rishis, the great Vaidyas, the great doctors, the wisdom holders of Ayurveda, some of the original texts, they were very clear about what health is. And I suppose the easiest way that I can share it with you when you start to really come into connection with the depths of Ayurveda is to understand that health is recognized in Ayurveda and generally in the Vedic tradition as our birthright. And so what's meant by that is that it is the natural way of nature for us to be in wholeness, for us to be in completeness, for us to be in ease. And dis-ease, the lack of ease, is a moving away from our naturalness. This may seem really commonsensical when I'm saying it, but however, if we consider some of our allopathic framework, so with Western medicine, sometimes and this is not necessarily where Western medicine arose from, actually. It had, in much the same way, this viewpoint. But somehow over time, there's been a misunderstanding in which it's almost like there's a presupposition that disease is more our natural state, that we will be, constantly throughout our life trying to achieve healthfulness, trying to optimize or achieve or get to some place of health. And that all of us will have imbalance or deal with imbalance in one way or another. And that is more a natural state than our healthfulness. Good morning. So if you start to acknowledge that, you can recognize that even internally, there can be a belief or sort of a framework in which health is held that assumes already imbalance or that assumes already disease rather than health. But if we start to really recognize that health is our very naturalness, that at all times the body, and also we can say this microcosmic system, but also the macrocosmic system, so let's just say universally nature, is always rallying to return to what it knows as nature. So it's always attempting to return to its own naturalness, to its own simplicity, let's say, of being at effortlessness, of being in ease. And if we think of it in that way, or not even think of it, but really know it in that way, taste it in that way, savor it in that way, then actually we can recognize that any time that the body or this system, physical body, emotional, energetic, or mental system here, anytime it moves outside of that naturalness, of balance, of ease, of harmony, here, now. And similarly, anytime nature moves outside of that, anytime we see a manifestation of that, in many ways, that's the attempt of the system to return itself back to naturalness. So in that way, we could almost say that dis-ease, when we move towards a disease state or when there's manifestation of imbalance in one way or another, it's both an attempt to return home, to return back to the way of, as in Taoism, they would say the way of nature, the way of the Tao, the way of harmony. But it's also maybe a first warning system of either this system or of the universal system to say, hey, something's moving outside of what is your completeness, what's your harmony, what's your balance. And then we can look at disease very differently. We can start to acknowledge it, almost have like an honoring of it, to say, oh, okay, there's a great wisdom found in this. And in that recognition, it really empowers us then to say, okay, in one way or another, what is it that needs to be acknowledged here or looked at? So from an Ayurvedic perspective, we're really empowered towards a recognition that healthfulness is our natural state and that healthfulness is our birthright. And that any manifestation of imbalance is really an attempt to go home, an attempt to return to that, or an attempt for the system to give us some warning signals. And even the word disease or dis-ease points to it. It's not necessarily translated as this in other languages, but when we touch into that, we can realize it's a lack of ease, a lack of being in our naturalness. And so in the Ayurvedic tradition, they were very clear when they outlined what health is, to say that health is this completeness, this balance, this sense of ease that's felt in the body, also in the mind, in the Atman, meaning in one's soul, in one's beingness, that one is at a place of ease. This is a beautiful addition in the Ayurvedic understanding of health. They also said in the digestive system, in the 7 dhatu, so in the 7 tissues, there's an ease. As well as, and this is very interesting, that there is an ease, a wholeness in the 5 senses. And you'll understand why in a moment if you haven't already from some of our discussions together. And so this pointing to health is a very unique sort of recognition and a unique translation of, and a unique definition of what health is. Of course, we know the WHO today acknowledges mental health as part of what health is, but Ayurveda, as well as other indigenous or traditional medicinal systems, they bring it home to even recognize that there needs to be a sense of ease also in one's inner realm. So not just this physical body or this mental body, we could actually say, the mental system, but actually that at one's beingness, at one's heart, at one's core, there's also a great wellness. We could almost say the well of oneself is deeply at peace, and that the five senses too are whole and complete and balanced. And this points to, when we start to understand the three causes of disease, we can understand why they point to this way of understanding health. So this is the first thing that I think is important for us to recognize in Ayurveda. And this is why Ayurveda is a relational medicine, or a medicine of now, a medicine of presence, because it really, really recognizes what's happening in the field of nowness. And if I stay more and more in this nowness, moment to moment, can I recognize those movements outside of my ease? Moment to moment, can I recognize when I'm not resting in my birthright as complete healthfulness, as wholeness, in my own effortless abiding on any level, really, on any level, whether that's physical, energetic, emotional, mental. And in that way, Ayurveda also, when it looks to offer medicine, it actually looks to offer that medicine in different ways. One is that it looks to maintain our natural state of health rather than just treat disease. So let me say that again. Ayurveda offers the gifts of maintaining what is your birthright. So saying, no, not even being preventative. It is preventative. I want to highlight that. But first and foremost, even before it's preventative, Ayurveda offers the understanding that this can be the ever-present lens through which life is received and known, that you can be at health for your constitution, for your system, for the way in which you've come into life. They give the gifts of medicine that is a maintenance medicine to maintain your already is homeostasis, not just to treat symptomology or disease. And that can be very contrasting to the collective concept that a lot of us have in our minds, that medicine is something that's used as a curative treatment. So it's used sometimes we speak of preventative, but even that assumes that disease is where we're getting to. So let me use this medicine to prevent where we'll all eventually end up in some kind of disease state. So I need to constantly be in this preventative energy, in this preventative kind of, let's say, this preventative mindset. And that requires a lot of maintenance, right? That in and of itself requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of resourcing. This concept of that, I need to avoid something or avert from something. So that can be a really powerful recognition when we start to realize that Ayurveda, as well as other traditional medicine systems, are giving us the gifts, giving us the tools and the awareness to really stay as we are. Let's say it in that way. To stay as we are. So neither to prevent, nor to only simply move from a curative framework or a curative mindset. So the other way that contemporary or Western medicine, and I have so much reverence and gratitude for Western medicine, but sometimes the way it has been misconstrued and understood today due to various factors is that we come to it to treat symptomology or to be curative only. And then we're constantly, it's like I think of that game Whack-A-Mole, right? So I only recently learned the name for it. But, as things are popping up, we're trying to hit them down consistently. But the symptoms keep popping up because the root is never really touched. The root of moving out of our naturalness of healthfulness is never really touched. And so instead, we're treating everything on the surface. This curative approach means that we're constantly in efforting rather than in ease. So we're actually constantly needing to treat disease with effort, and the symptoms can pop up in so many different ways. And so in that way also Ayurveda recognizes, no, it is your very naturalness to be at ease, to be at effortlessness. And one wave or another that moves outside of that can be recognized in the presence of now. That's the true medicine of Ayurveda. Can be recognized in the nowness. And in that recognition, the things don't grow to be greater. Let's say it in that way. Whether it's a little movement in how we're orienting our days or a little movement in how we might be eating, there can be much more alignment with the rhythms of this body as an intrinsic, unseparated, interconnected part of all of nature. So to move in nature's way. And so when we come to Ayurveda as a true maintenance of what already is, even that word says that there's something to be done. But let's just say when it's a resting into what already is, a staying as you already are, a staying in your healthfulness, a cherishing, honoring, and gratitude for your already is healthfulness, then it keeps us in this maintained homeostasis. And any little movement is brought back home. Any little movement outside of that is brought back home. So this is a really powerful shift from how some of us might consider, even subversively, let me say it in that way. It may be so implanted in us, so conditioned in us, the way we think of health and the way we think of disease, that so often we're either racing towards that kind of preventative mindset, or we're constantly curing in symptomology. And so Ayurveda, from this understanding of health, it then offers, and these great rishis, these great masters, offered the three primary causes, they said, that would create any lack of ease, that would move us outside of our healthfulness. And these are powerful. And we take much more time, for example, I was mentioning earlier in the Ayurveda online course, to go through those, but I would like to mention them at least this morning so we have some introduction to them. So what are these three causes of disease according to Ayurveda? So they each have, of course, Sanskrit terms, but let me just sort of translate them into English. And they're in a specific order. So they all involved sort of moving against or misusing. And the first one is the misuse of our wisdom, or it's a moving against our wisdom. But even when I use the word our, it's really moving against wisdom. Let's say it in that way. Misusing wisdom. The understanding that there is a great wisdom that, again, as I was saying before, there is a natural wisdom that rallies for all of us, even in our uniqueness, even in our constitutional differences, to be at balance, to be at home, to be at peace, to be in healthfulness. There's a natural wisdom that calls us to eat in one way, move in one way, engage in one way, live in one way or another, to connect to the earth in one way or another, that specifically for us, let's say it in that way, that specifically keeps us aligned to our own natural way of being embodied while we're here. And so there is a wisdom, whether we call this buddhi in the tradition, it's like the wisdom that pours into us from all of life, life's recognition, life's insight. And that's available to each one of us when we're quiet enough, when we're resting enough, let's say, when we're in our own harmony, when we're basking in our own presence. When we're there, that insight can naturally say to us, no, eating a pizza at midnight is probably not going to be the best thing for your digestion tomorrow. And it's not really an effortful choice from there. There's like a natural wisdom, a natural call to live in harmony, let's say. But the interesting thing is that the more we live outside of that, the less we're acquainted with our own harmony. And so living outside of ease, living in unease, living in dis-ease, becomes almost more comfortable or more known, let's say. And so the first cause of disease is that we move against our wisdom. It's like moving against precedence, like the example I just gave. When I eat this, this happens, and yet I still do it. And so according to the Vedic tradition, why do we do those things? There's so many things we could discuss about that. But most of the time, this moving against our wisdom is because of specific samskaras, specific tendencies, karma that we've been born with, not to haunt us, but to teach us things reflectively, for us to really engage with in this life and to come home to a recognition that we're free of those also, for those to be in many ways teachings that we move through. And so when we move against our own wisdom, when we move against our own naturalness, this is the first cause of disease. It seems quite commonsensical, right? So that could be, for example, in, like I gave the example of food now, that could be, for example, going to bed too late. That could be, for example, in relational space, knowing that if you do one thing or another, that it's going to bring combustion or conflict in the space with another, and that in and of itself is going to be diseasing for your system and for theirs. It can also be knowing that if we dump all of the garbage and the waste that we dump onto this planet, that of course it's going to cause a disease for this planet and also for our systems. So there's a recognition, a clear knowing in each and every one of us that is directly connected to Buddhi. It's directly connected to the macrocosmic intelligence. We all know it. It's the very fibers. It's the very things that allow us to be that we don't even, we might take for granted. The fact that this heart beats and you don't even have to think about it. The fact that breath moves and you don't even have to think about it. The fact that you were even born into an embodiment and somehow the mystery, the awe of that occurred, and we take it for granted. This very Buddhi, this very intelligence is what we're all made of. Every fiber exists because of it. And so when we move against that, when we're not quiet and slow and steady enough for that, then we all have our own ways, inclusively myself. I see the times when things get hurried or when the mind is given more attention so that it can veil the naturalness, the ease of what's there in its own simplicity. And from that, different choices arise. And so the medicine for this first cause of disease can really be exactly that, to slow down, to really allow the life to be pervaded by more pauses or by more spaces, to follow the tools of Ayurveda, because the tools of Ayurveda, what they're really doing is they're reorienting us to this wisdom. So pragya, this wisdom, as it's called, parada, moving against, or almost a crime against our own wisdom. So that pragya is so available when we become quiet enough. And so really taking times throughout the day where we can stop and recognize, but also Ayurveda coming to it in this way, it really realigns us, or it helps us to come into remembrance, let's say it in that way, of what we already know. So that's the first cause of disease. So many more things that could be said about it, but it gives us a little taste of it. The second is the misuse. So the first, the misuse of wisdom or intellect. The second is the misuse of the five senses. So remember when I said earlier that health also in the Ayurvedic tradition is understood as a balance, a harmony of the five senses. And when we've been discussing Dinacharya, we've been discussing keeping all five senses healthy. So the smell, the taste, the sight, the hearing, and the touch on the skin. Keeping all five of these healthy, as we do with Dinacharya, by purifying them with these daily routines, but also acknowledging what we allow ourselves to ingest through these five senses. According to Ayurveda, this is also a wisdom, because these five senses, they create the fabric of all five elements that live within us. And thus, these five elements create our physical structure, but they also create our emotional, mental structure. And we know this, right? So if we listen to music that has hateful or violent messaging into it, if we watch things, whether it's through TV or on screens, or we see it in real life, things that are violent or conflictual, if we are touched in ways that feel less than loving, if, for example, we smell things that are caustic or really chemicalized or very strong and invasive, and if we taste and we use this channel for absolute garbage, what starts to happen to our system? So in that way, Ayurveda very clearly says, get aligned to naturalness with the five senses. And the best way we can do this is to be in nature. I keep highlighting it in every way I can. I'm using the platform of social media to really say at this time, yes, maybe there is physical distancing, but it doesn't mean that you can't be in nature as much as possible. You can take your work outside. A lot of you are working remotely. You can spend more time probably than ever in nature. Go and spend as much time as possible, because nature is the best medicine for these five senses. To gaze upon the natural sight of the colors, to be touched by air and sun. I got a little bit overtouched by sun yesterday. It's funny because last week someone said, what to do with sunscreen? So I put a little bit of my natural zinc oxide sunscreen on yesterday, but the sun was so full and resplendent, as was my time outdoors. So to be touched through these five senses, to eat also of nature, to be in sattva, to be in balance, in the purity and the wholeness of nature, that's the best medicine for these five senses that can really bring them into their own harmony, into their own naturalness. Nature will bring them into their own nature. So that one is the second cause of disease. When we misuse these five senses, start to acknowledge, how do you use these channels? What do you ingest through these senses? And we can think about it as we discover more. Actually, in that online course, I discuss how we misuse, how we overuse, and how we underuse these senses. So even, for example, if we stay on a computer all day, we're misusing the sense of the eyes, but we're also on some level underusing it, because a lot of us get nearsighted with this. When we're in nature and we have to look at like expansive vistas, then what happens actually is that farsightedness is also, and the way in which the eyes are able to be used in that way, they're more balanced. So that's the second cause of disease, the misuse of the senses. And then the third cause of disease, which is a very profound one, and I'm going to leave you with this today, is time, actually. But parinama, as it is in Sanskrit, is time. We can actually think of it again as misuse of time, or moving against the recognition of time. And what does that mean? Well, firstly, time in and of itself, of course, on some level, creates degeneration. So just the recognition that this body and this mind will eventually degenerate, it will eventually go back to dust, is a wisdom in and of itself. And so there's a recognition in Ayurveda that that's one of the causes of disease, is that the system naturally degenerates. But many of us are actually moving against the wisdom of time, which means we're moving against the seasons, we're moving against the daily rhythms, the circadian rhythms, we're moving against the lunar rhythms, so the rhythms of the moon. We're moving against our own natural rhythms of eating and working and lifestyle, our own sleeping rhythms, and we've been discussing all of that. We're moving unnaturally against the natural rhythms of life. And we've been talking about how to come more into accordance with these rhythms, because when we're in accordance with these rhythms, we're in accordance with nature. And so when we move against those rhythms, we're really moving against time. And what that can do is it can speed up the degeneration process. When we don't sleep properly, when we, that 24-hour cycle is not honored in the way in which it really truly should be, from sunrise to sunset. When we don't honor the seasonality, recognizing what's appropriate in certain seasons for eating or for doing, like we know we get hypothermia if we go outside in -30 weather without the proper clothing. It's like, really, we truly know things like that. It's so commonsensical and simple, right? But we move against time in many different ways. Or even the most profound movement against time, which is a denial of the fact that each one of us will eventually pass. If we were to really, really recognize that the imminence of death, of passing in the physical, mental form in this life, how would we savor each day? It creates a disease of entitlement, really, I could say. A disease of being entitled to every day, and therefore a disease of sort of apathy, when we don't recognize that our days are on some level limited, that there is a preciousness to each day. And I think this time that we've all had together now, I'm really hopeful that there'll be a reorientation to the recognition of this. Really recognizing the preciousness of each breath, the preciousness of each moment, the preciousness of each day. Just this last week, a dear friend of ours in the community passed, and there was again a deep contemplation in my own system. It's been a year and a half in which there's been so much passing. in my realm. So many individuals leaving or passing, leaving the body. And so when that starts to become a stark recognition, then we also start to really recognize the potency of each day we're afforded here. And then how would we treat each day? How would we come to it? Would we just wake up with another day thinking, yeah, I'm entitled to this, and really stay in priorities that are less than the things that we have fervor towards? We see it, right, with individuals who have literally a prescribed limited time. And we see it also with elderly people. When there's still a good, fierce cognition, they really come to life with such a zeal. And also, I would say, such a simplicity, like just a recognition, a softness in the recognition of their own limited days. Really, all of us have limited days. We don't know when it's coming. And so, in that way, this is a true Ayurvedic teaching. To recognize this third cause of disease is a powerful teaching, because then it really, really invites us to be in the potency of every day with a savoring, with an aliveness, and by really coming into harmony, coming into correspondence with the rhythms of every day, with the rhythms of our lives, and not taking any of it for granted. So these are the three causes of disease. There's so much more we could contemplate and discuss together. But I really hope that by understanding the gift of these, according to the Ayurvedic tradition, you'll also come to recognize the gift of really being alive and the gift of your own healthfulness. And it'll help you to be employed and resourced in your own maintenance of your healthfulness, in your own, let's just say, celebration, even more than maintenance, celebration of your healthfulness. We'll take a couple moments of break now, just a minute or two actually, and meet right back here for our meditation this morning, which in and of itself is a great medicine. Namaste to each of you. So much gratitude for the blessing of these Ayurvedic teachings as they've come into my own life, and I hope that they're a blessing to each and every one of you. Okay, see you in just a couple moments.